as an author, how should you be thinking about how much you're spending on advertising as it relates to your margins? We had a situation recently that really brought this home for me with the bookstore where we sold something online through a paid ad, and at first glance it looked good, but when I really dug into the numbers, I realized it wasn't as great as I thought it was. By the way, if you want to know more about what it's like to run a bookstore, click on the little thing that pops up in one of these corners. But after that experience, I went into our school community where we run a community for authors, and I made a post about it and how to think about ads as a percentage of your sales to figure out how much of your margin you're giving up whenever you run paid ads. So instead of me just talking about it on here, I want to walk you through that specific post in our community. So if you're not a member of the community, you get a sneak peek into what you can get there. And if you'd like to check this kind of stuff out for yourself, you can join using the link in the description. All right, let's jump in. This is Author Unlimited. You can see we got stuff in the classroom, different resources here, different courses, and we got all kinds of fun posts. If you come down, you can see the good numbers to memorize. This is the post that we're looking for. So I'm not just going to read this word for word for you, but I'll give you my thoughts as I go through it, which is start at the top. Every time you hear about ad spend and authors, it's always done through ROAS, return on ad spend, which is basically how much money are you making from every dollar that you spend on ads. But in my opinion, I found that to be a little bit misleading. For example, if you have a ROAS of 1.5, you might think, okay, great. For every dollar I'm spending on ads, I'm going to make enough money to cover that ad and have 50 cents left over to spend on overhead. But think of it like this. If you're using a credit card to pay for your ads, and so it's the first day of the billing cycle, you put ad spend on that credit card, you operate for 30 days. During those 30 days, you're getting revenue. You're going to use that revenue to pay that card off the next month. So if you had a 1.5 times ROAS, then that means that your ads were 67% of the revenue that you brought in. So after setting aside the money that you need to pay off that credit card for ads, you only get to keep 33% of your revenue to go towards inventory if you're doing direct sales and all your overhead. So let's put some numbers to this. If you had $50 of ads on a credit card and that $50 of ad spend generated $75 of sales, then great, you've got that 1.5 times ROAS. But let's say that you're doing direct sales, you have physical inventory that you're managing, and every time you sell something, you have to make sure that you're setting money aside to replace it. If your margin on that $75 is 75%, in other words, it's going to cost you about $18 or $19 to fulfill those orders, then you're left with $6.25 of the $75 to cover overhead and taxes after you've subtracted out the ad spend. And so what I end up seeing happening is people are putting their ad spend on a credit card, they're paying the credit card off in full, but in order to do it, they're not able to set aside enough money to pay for inventory coming up because they're having to pay for their overhead expenses. And so then once they get to the point where you need to order more inventory, there's no money to do it. So then you go into debt to do that, and now you've got another monthly payment. So now you have to sell even more to cover that monthly payment, and you're still not setting aside money for inventory. So you can see where, like, if you're not setting money aside for these different things, it quickly kind of snowballs into something that's really unmanageable. And so I saw the interplay between ROAS and margin with the bookstore. We sold something online that we have like a 40% margin on. Now with Shopify and Shop Ads, the kind of cool thing about it is you can tell Shopify, I want to run ads, here's my budget, and this is the range of return on ad spend that I'm willing to take. And Shopify actually won't charge you anything until they sell something. If you set your return on ad spend too high, then you're never going to sell anything, and so they're not going to be effective. But if you set it too low, you can very quickly just start losing money, especially because we found out that the way that Shopify calculates their return on ad spend is they take the total dollar amount of the transaction, not just the actual sales price. So if they added in shipping, if they added in sales tax, they're calculating their return on ad spend on that, not just the sales price, which to me I don't like, because the sales tax and the shipping is not your money to begin with. You have to turn around and give that to somebody else. But even outside of all that, let's just look at this example. This ad specifically gave us around a 3 times ROAS, which at first we're like, that's great. 3 times ROAS is better than I see a lot of people doing with their author businesses. But then whenever you convert that 3 times ROAS to percentage of sales, it's 33% of the sale. So of that 40% profit margin, we only got to keep the remaining 7% after paying for that ad. So putting some actual numbers to this, let's say that it was a $20 book, and we paid 33% of that for ads. So it cost us $6.67, and the book cost us $12. So of the $20 sale, our total cost was like $18.67. And so we keep $1 and some change. Now, on the bright side of this, Since it's Shopify and we have our newsletter and everything set up there, then whenever the person purchases, they're more likely to set up their email address to get newsletters. And so now we can give them information about new releases we have and promotions that we're doing, and we're more likely to get more sales from that person later without having to advertise to them. And it's somebody who wouldn't have otherwise been in our network. So it's a good way for us, I think, to add to our newsletter list and basically have it paid for. But we were pretty close in this situation to actually losing money on this one. So this whole analysis is really more useful if you have fulfillment costs like inventory, shipping, and things like that. If you're doing only ebooks and maybe the cost to fulfill those is minimal, or you're doing KDP or KU and you're just running ads to Amazon, then a lot of this might not be as applicable, but it's still good to think about, just to know that like every single thing that you do is going to impact your margin in some way. So make sure you're protecting that margin. So if you're thinking about margin and how much of your margin you're giving away for ads, it's a good idea to be able to figure out your return on ad spend and be able to convert that to a percentage of revenue. So if you have a 1x ROAS, it means that your ads equal 100% of your revenue. If you got a 2x ROAS, it means that your ads are 50% of revenue. If you have a 3x ROAS, it means that your ads are 33% of revenue. Basically, just take the number 1 divided by however much ROAS is, and that's going to tell you what percentage of your revenue your ad spend is going to make up. So start with margin, know how much your margins are, like how much of every sale do you get to keep, and then figure out what's the minimum ROAS you're willing to take. For example, if you've got an 80% margin, that means that your costs, like your inventory cost and your fulfillment cost, are 20% of your revenue. Then a 1.25 ROAS gets you to break even before paying any of your overhead costs. So you're going to get the money in, you're going to replace that inventory, you're going to pay for your ad, and you have no money left over. Really important to start thinking about ads as a percentage of revenue, not just as a multiple of revenue. So hopefully this is helpful. Let's jump back out. The lesson here is that everything that you spend should be seen as a percentage of revenue, especially if it's something that's tied so closely to revenue like your inventory cost or your ad costs. And then do everything you can to increase that margin, to increase how much of every sale you get to keep. Because usually if you can increase your margins, then that increase typically goes straight to the bottom line. There's usually no other cost involved in increasing your margins. If you thought this was helpful and you would like to see more posts like this, check out Author Unlimited. The link is in the description. Join us over there. Looking forward to seeing you. And otherwise, I will see you next time.